So about a year and a half ago, I made my first booktube video, just kind of to see what it would be like and see if maybe there was any interest in it. And it did moderately well. And then I kind of just gave up. I didn't really put out anything for a while. But recently, that video took off and has 12,000 views, and I've been getting a bunch of subscribers. So I figured, why not do another one and see if people want it? All right, so the video that I've been talking about was 5 underrated science fiction novels, and since it was doing so well, I figured I'd go ahead and do another 5 underrated science fiction novels, and we'll see what happens. All of these are going to have less than 10,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I'm going to go in order from the highest rating or the most ratings to the least ratings at number one. So here we go. So coming in at number 5, we have A Fall of Moondust by Arthur C. Clarke, and this one has 9,298 ratings on Goodreads. And basically, the premise of this one is that the moon has become a tourist destination, and there is this ship called the Selene, and it's kind of more of a like a boat. It's depicted as a cruise ship traveling across the surface of the moon, and Captain Harris is the one that is captaining the ship. And over the course of one of the cruises, just a regular cruise, they start to feel some tremors in the ground, and without warning, there's a sinkhole, and the entire ship just kind of sinks down into the center of the moon. And the novel kind of focuses around the sinking of the ship, almost like Titanic in space, and them trying to be rescued with their communications being down and they're slowly sinking deeper and deeper. So it's focused on that escape aspect, but also it does a pretty good job with the characters. Arthur C. Clarke generally is not known for having very memorable characters, but he has pretty decent character development in this one, with the each of the characters having their own like personality. Some people are going crazy, some people are trying to help, and basically the whole entire novel takes place inside of this ship. And yeah, it was pretty good. It's not my favorite Arthur C. Clarke, but it is definitely worth checking out. Oh, and since it is fall, we are drinking a Leinenkugel Oktoberfest. Delicious. All right, number 4, we have Sea of Rust by C. Robert Cargill, and this one has 9,216 ratings. And this one is probably the most recent book that I have read of these 5, and I actually really liked this one. I think I gave this one 5 stars. And the premise of this one is that humanity is extinct and has been taken over by robots. So this one robot in particular, her name is Brittle. She's the main character, and she is a scavenger. So she is constantly traveling the Sea of Rust, is what they call it, this open plain, and searching for broken down robots that have gone mad. And she basically harvests parts from them and uses them to repair other robots. And the main conflict is that instead of humanity and different superpowers, now various robotic mainframes have taken over, and they're called OWIs. I forget what that stands for, but they're OWIs. They're big mainframes, and they're trying to assimilate all of these remaining robots into their own mainframe and take over the world that way. It's just basically giant supercomputers. And the main character is trying to hold out, and she doesn't want to be a part of that. And it's really interesting because it's a post-apocalyptic novel, but it's interesting to see that each of these characters has their own strong personality. Usually we see robots as like not having their own like personality type, but each individual robot, every single one in this story has its own personality, and that personality is further driven on the type of bot that it is. For example, you have like nanny bots, you have like comfort bots, you have repair bots, various things like this, military bots, and each of that defines what their personality is. And throughout the novel, you start to see them have bits and pieces of their former pre-apocalypse personality shining through. So you get kind of glimpses of the past, but it's really a novel about what is going to happen to these robots now that they have taken over. So it was definitely really interesting. That's not the best explanation of it, but I definitely recommend this one. 5 stars for sure. All right, coming in at number 3 with 4,978 ratings is The Man Who Folded Himself by David Gerrold. Now, this one here was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula. I don't think it actually won any of them. But this is a time travel novel, and it was actually a pretty solid one at that. Basically, the main character is Daniel Eakins, and he inherits a time machine. But this time machine is really interesting. It's basically just a belt with a silver belt buckle, and this belt is his time machine. And the premise of it is that he wants to go back in time and basically change the past. He wants to change history. So he wants to go back and, for example, maybe kill Hitler or win a bunch of money in gambling or the stock market, things like that. But it's all for personal gain. And he decides, well, if I do this, I go back to the future and I don't like the results, I don't like what happened, then I can always just go back in time and tell myself not to do it and convince myself not to do it. And for the most part, that works until... Actually, I got to read exactly how they word it here on the back because it's pretty funny. He says, he talks about how comes back to a Earth that he doesn't recognize after he does something. And the way he says it is, I could have been on another planet. The culture was incomprehensible. I went back and talked myself out of eliminating Jesus Christ. So that right there is kind of an interesting premise. So it's basically, he goes back in time, does some things that he thinks is going to be for the good, goes back into the future and was like, oh, whoops, that didn't work out. Goes back again and tries to convince himself not to do these things. And that's basically the premise of the book. I didn't really love it. It's not one of my favorites, but it was a solid book and definitely underrated. So therefore, it's on this list. All right, so next up we have The Return Man by V.M. Zito. And this one has 1,515 ratings. And I kind of toyed with the idea of putting this one on the list because it's not strictly sci-fi. It's a post-apocalyptic novel, but I feel like it has enough elements of sci-fi, and I'm very lax with the term sci-fi to begin with. So like I said, this is a science fiction post-apocalyptic novel, and in this one, there was a virulent outbreak or some sort of outbreak that happened, and the country was split down the center to east and west. And the east is considered the safe zone. The west is a wasteland. And there's just a big border wall separating the two, and you're not allowed to go back and forth between them. But one man, what is his name? Let's see here. Henry Marco. So Henry Marco has developed a job, or he created a job for himself where he travels into the wastelands on the west searching for missing people or deceased people or like relatives and loved ones of the survivors on the east, basically just to bring them peace. So they hire him. He goes, he finds these people and figures out what happened to them, if they survived, if they died, if whatever might have happened with this outbreak. And he goes back and basically gets payment for giving them closure. And eventually the government, Department of Homeland Security, catches on to what he's doing, and they send him on a mission. And he is sent to where the apocalypse, the outbreak originated, this specific city on the west coast. And he's sent there on a very specific mission, and he finds out things that he probably shouldn't have found out. And we learn about exactly what caused this apocalypse. It's a pretty interesting story. I don't think I've ever read anything else like that, where you have someone deliberately traveling into the wastelands to bring closure to the survivors. So that right there was a pretty interesting concept to me. But then once we do find out what this apocalypse was, that's really where it starts to pick up and get interesting. And I found this one just randomly at a bookstore. Like I said, it doesn't have that many ratings, 1,515. So definitely want to go check out. All right. And the final book on the list, we have Second Paradigm by Peter J. Wax. This one only has 154 ratings. Um, and I have an interesting story about this one, which I'll explain in a second. But basically, this is another time travel story, but this one made my head hurt. Out of all the books I've ever read, this one probably hurt my head the most, just to wrap my head around what was happening. It's a non-linear time travel story, so you read one chapter, and the next chapter has nothing, well, seemingly nothing to do with the chapter before. It's a completely different time frame and everything like that. But as you continue reading, the story starts to bit by bit and bits and pieces link itself together, and you start to understand what's happening. And it's that moment when it clicks that really made it interesting to me. It's basically, let's see here. Christopher Nost is the main character. He's an astrophysicist and also a convicted murderer. And we don't know exactly which one of those is the correct one, or if they both are, or what happens, because you're constantly bouncing around. And this book, I probably never would have picked it up, except for I was at a Comic-Con one year, and the author was at a booth with Kevin J. Anderson. This book, I should mention, is printed through Kevin J. Anderson's Wordfire Press. And he was there signing the books, and I looked it over, and I was going to pass it by, but then he kind of gave me his pitch. And the pitch that he gave me was, this book doesn't have to be read in order. He said you can start anywhere in the book, pick a chapter and read to the end, then go back to the beginning and keep reading until the point that you started at. And I'm like, that's really interesting. I thought it was a gimmick, so I bought it, and I do still think it's kind of a gimmick. You should read it from beginning to end. But yes, in theory, since it's so disjointed, you could start anywhere and read it and get the full story. Um, I don't think I rated this one like a perfect score. I think I gave it 3.5 to 4 stars, but it is very, very underrated. It's a very brain burny, like screws with your brain time travel book. So definitely check it out or not. Doesn't really matter to me. But those were my 5 books of underrated sci-fi books. If you thought this was good, maybe leave a comment, all those things the YouTubers are supposed to say. And otherwise, also drop me a comment. Let me know what other lists you would like to see, what other books. And maybe if this gets enough traction, I will get back onto BookTube and start making some more videos again. See ya.